Alex Finchler on the left, playing John Kenny Latham. He is on your right as the burn player.
And Kenny's list it's weird because it feels like Burn over the last couple of months has coalesced into sort of a stock build at this point. Kenny is playing 11 creatures, 4 Guide, 4 Eidolon, 3 Lavamancer, 4 Bolt, 4 Chain Lightning, 4 Lava Blast, 4 Rift Bolt, 4 Spike, 4 Price of Progress, 3 Searing Blaze, 2 Sulfuric Vortex. The only deviation from the deck list that I advocate is I like 4 Searing Blaze in the main and 1 Vortex. But otherwise, it's the same list.
All right, game is underway. Turn 1 for Kenny Latham is going to be Grim Lavamancer. He passes back. Alex immediately can narrow it down to one of 2 decks here, either Blue-Red Delver or just Burn. And Deathrite Shaman is the play for Finchler. And Kenny Latham's willing to spend a Lightning Bolt on Deathrite Shaman to hit with Grim.
Totally fine, in my opinion, given that there is a fetch land already in the graveyard. So Deathrite Shaman is pretty threatening in that spot. And the other alternative is just to say go, because you can't attack with your Lavamancer into the Deathrite Shaman. So it's not pretty, but the hand's kind of forced, in my opinion.
Yeah, if Kenny had a second land that turn, he could have bolted Alex and Grim Lavamancered the Deathrite Shaman as a way to kill it. But you see, Kenny just stuck on 1 land here.
But you had to keep 1-landers with Burn all the time. This is not uncommon.
Right, when you look at his hand, he does have Eidolon of the Great Revel and Fire Blast in his hand, so plenty of sources of damage if he can find 1 more land, but nothing doing so far. He will suspend a Rift Bolt and pass the turn back.
Alex with a heads-up play here, fetching the Forest. Getting your basics into play is so important against Burn because of Price of Progress. Especially for a deck like Jund that has to get to 4 mana to cast things like Bloodbraid Elf.
And we'll see what Alex can deploy here. Against Burn, as a Jund deck, I would assume you're just looking for a fast clock in this matchup, maybe something like Tarmogoyf.
Your best cards are Tarmogoyf and Hymn to Torak. Hymn to Torak's your best disruption against Burn because every card you hit is something, and Tarmogoyf's your clock. Dark Confidant, on the other hand, not quite as good.
Yeah, he plays Dark Confidant. He does have Deathrite Shaman to go with it, and because of that, Kenny will spend his Rift Bolt getting rid of Deathrite Shaman. So 2 burn spells for 3. Neither have been pointed at Alex as of yet. He's at a healthy 18 life, as Kenny just simply suspends another Rift Bolt.
So there are no main deck copies of Umezawa's Jitte in this Jund list, correct?
There are no copies of it.
Sometimes they have a main deck copy, and that's another way to steal the matchup.
Yeah, he does have one on the sideboard. Have to assume we'll see that one after game 1. But right now, game 1 actually seems like it's under control for Finchler. He's hits for 2 with Dark Confidant and takes the lead on life points, mainly thanks to the fact that Kenny is still stuck on 1.
And Liliana of the Veil, a nice play for Alex here too, attacking his hand. That's the source of disruption he needs.
Yeah, he discards a Bloodstained Mire. Alex is down to 1 card. If he can empty his hand, this Liliana will just be one-sided. Kenny with no shortage of cards to discard. Looks like he did discard a second Fire Blast. I doubt he was going to get to cast that one anyway.
Correct. If someone discards a Fire Blast in this spot, it's a strong indication they have a second copy.
And he passes. Rift Bolt is the play by Kenny. It's going to go upstairs. Burn is one of the few decks, they can just ignore the Liliana, right?
Well, it's another thing that taxes your hand. He doesn't have to play. Now, this play I don't like from Kenny. In this spot, you're playing against Jund. It's a deck full of creature removal, and you're playing against Liliana as well. To me, that's Liliana fodder. All I want to do is draw spikes and bumps for the rest of the game.
He casts Eidolon of the Great Revel. It's going to get edicted. That allowed Alex to spend a turn taking 0.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you would have liked him to see him just throw some burn spells, discard that Eidolon to Liliana, and keep going about his business.
Yeah, now with this Bloodbraid into Tarmogoyf, the race is on big time.
Yeah, Alex, that was his play for the turn. Now with a lot of power on the board, knocks Kenny down to 12, has him on a 2-turn, if not maybe a 1-turn clock.
And Alex has the ability to gain life now with this Deathrite Shaman, so all sorts of bad for Kenny.
Yeah, Alex is at 15. Kenny can deal a lot of damage, but not that much. You see Price of Progress in his hand. That's good for 6. Fire Blast is good for 10. He has a land. Is there a way here? I mean, he's close, right? Is there a top? He can't do it this turn, but maybe with the right top deck he could.
Yes.
Well, he has 10. He needs to deal 15. And more importantly, he has to do it through a Deathrite Shaman. It seems like he's just a little short.
It's tough. Alex, it needs to involve something like Alex Dark Confidant and reveals the Maelstrom Pulse that has no functionality. He needs some help from Dark Confidant. And Alex has been pretty fortunate so far, taking no damage.
And he's going to cast the Price of Progress. Good play by Latham, manages to do it while Alex is tapped out. One thing you often see players do against Burn is they leave up a wasteland so that they can waste their own non-basics in response to this card. And he's going to Fire Blast the Bloodbraid Elf by getting rid of the rest of his lands.
Yeah, the problem I have with this play is this leaves him at he's basically without hope at this point. He can't win the game in 2 turns with the resources that he has.
Yeah, I'm not sure he could win the game with any of the resources that he had. So at that point, if you're picking which way you get to lose the game.
Sure, but at least you have some, Alex has Dark Confidant on his deck. You don't know. There could be some sequence of cards he reveals that gives you a shot. If he flips over Bloodbraid Elf on his last turn, it's not impossible.
Alex will go down to 7 off that Dark Confidant trigger. Liliana goes up to 3, gets a Sulfuric Vortex out of Kenny's hand.
Kenny also should have sacrificed the Arid Mesa first because it's 2 damage off the Price of Progress regardless. So not a lot to be gained by leaving the Arid Mesa in play.
Yeah. All right, and Alex, pretty wisely here, is going to main phase, eat a creature with Deathrite Shaman. Wants to make sure he gains that life before Kenny draws a card. Kenny draws 1. It's not a 9-point burn spell, so game 1 will go to Alex Finchler.
Alex got pretty close to the start that he needed. He was able to play creatures that threatened Kenny enough that he was willing to use some of his bolts on them. And from that stage, Jund has a shot when you get to the spot where it's your creatures against their burn spells, and you're not facing down every bolt and every chain lightning they draw, especially when you have Tarmogoyf.
All right, we'll go ahead and look at the players' sideboards here. Alex Finchler, this is a matchup that game 1 is typically not good for him, but he does have some weapons. And he's up a game, so he has a lot of things going for him. The big one you talked about, there's a 1 copy of Umezawa's Jite in the sideboard. It's great in this matchup. It's a good source of life gain. It forces Kenny to burn Alex's creatures instead of Alex. That would certainly be coming in. Also, cards like Scavenging Ooze or even Duress seem particularly good in this matchup.
They're all excellent. There's some games where neither player presents a lot of creatures, or Alex is the only one with creatures and Kenny is choosing not to kill them, where Scavenging Ooze isn't great, but it's always fine, and sometimes it can run away with the game. The 2 Duresses and the Jite are excellent as well.
All right, over on Kenny's side of the board, Burn is one of those very touchy decks. You have a sideboard, but you want to make sure you never board too much in any matchup. What is good for him here?
Well, the cards I like in the sideboard the most are things like Smash the Smithereens, Sulfuric Vortex, Searing Blood, utility that also does damage.
Things that are still burn spells.
Those are the best cards on the board. Kenny's sideboard is a Pyroblast, a Elemental Blast, 2 Searing Bloods, 2 Smash the Smithereens, 2 Sulfuric Vortex, 2 Relic of Progenitus, 3 Ensnaring Bridge, 2 Vexing Gesture. I like the 2 copies of Relic because they're basically free and you're playing against Tarmogoyf and Deathrite Shaman, so those are easy to bring in. And I like the 2 copies of Searing Blood as well. You're playing against a deck that's creature base is Deathrite Shaman, Bloodbraid Elf, Dark Confidant. Those are all targets. And with your Relic of Progenitus, you can even get a Tarmogoyf.
Yeah, and how do you feel about cards like Sulfuric Vortex in this matchup? There's 2 in his main deck and additional ones in his sideboard. If you're not boarding them in, does that mean you're boarding out the ones in your main?
I can kind of take them or leave them in the matchup. On the play, I think the creatures in Kenny's deck are pretty solid against Jund because your Goblin Guy gets to connect at least once. Often it'll connect twice. When you're on the draw, the creatures get much worse because Alex is able to defend himself with things like Tarmogoyf and Lightning Bolt and so on a lot more efficiently. So it's one of those situations where on the play, I like to keep in my creatures. So things like Sulfuric Vortex, which are marginal, often either stay on the sideboard or you're not adding, you have 1 in your main, you're not adding any more out of your sideboard. And on the draw, some of those effects become a lot better simply because your creatures get much worse.
Can't agree more here. So we are going to be setting up for game 2 here.
I do side out my Goblin Guides a lot. If anything, I'd probably err on the side of siding them out too often. But against a deck like Jund, a lot has to go right for Goblin Guide to matter. Especially when you're playing against a deck with Deathrite Shaman, your creatures are additional liabilities because if they die, then you have to care about Deathrite Shaman a lot more than you do otherwise. So to leave in your creatures against removal heavy decks with Deathrite Shaman like Jund, you need to make sure that those creatures really pull their weight. And Goblin Guide, Eidolon the Great Revel, Grim Lavamancer, their ceiling against Jund is pretty low.
Now, how do you feel about this? Because here's what I've done when I've played Burn, but I'm no master of the deck. Goblin Guide on the play you might want to keep in, because that turn 1 Goblin Guide, when your opponent hasn't even played Magic yet, is just so powerful that I want to have that draw and really don't want him on any other turn.
That's a pretty good handhold. Also, there's something about a critical mass of creatures. When you have a lot of creatures in your deck, if one creature dies, you still have another creature. That's great. When you're already in the place where you're boarding out some of their creatures because they're not efficient in the matchup, even if your remaining creatures are good for the games, your opponent still has their Abrupt Decays and their Bolts or whatever, and they get to line up pretty efficiently. They have their 8 removal spells against your 8 creatures, and your creatures don't even have all this upside in the event that they survive. So once you're in the position where you're boarding out some of your creatures, it's usually correct to try to bail on most or all of them to try to dead your opponent's removal spells.
Yeah, but with 11 creatures, you do have to keep in some of them. You don't want to go with an 11-card board plan.
He doesn't have enough cards to bring in. He has 15 sideboard cards. 2 of them are creatures to begin with. 2 of them are Red Blast. So already he has to leave in some of them. But
sure. And your favorite one in this matchup would be Eidolon then?
Grim Lavamancer. Combat can get rough against Jund because they are so good at blocking. And they are capable of damage racing. So the Eidolon triggers that you're generating do matter because they have bolts and blood braids and tarmogoyfs and so on.
Yeah, Grim Lavamancer can also hold off an Umezawa's Jite for 1 turn if it needs to.
Yep. And if they're walling up with Tarmogoyfs, it can be removal spells for Deathrite Shamans. It's the best of the bunch, but it's still, because they have so much removal, it's, whenever I have a Grim Lavamancer go unchecked against Jund, I feel like I got very lucky. It happens, but it's rare.
Yeah. So we'll be in the game in a second here.
So this is a matchup that's generally very solid for Burn in my mind, but it's not as favorable as some of the very non-basic land-heavy Delver of Secret Strategies. So even though Jund is still on the spectrum of positive matchups, because they do have better pressure and because they do have basic lands they can go get, unlike most Delver strategies, the matchup isn't quite as good as it is against most of those decks.
If you remember, Alex Finchler, who is a competitor in our last Invitational Top 8, that's determining who's in the Players' Championship at the end of the year. That Invitational was won by Tom Ross defeating Reed Duke in the finals. He joins the cast of players in the finals of our other Invitational winners. So if we go back to season 1, we had our winner of the Invitational was Derek Sheets. He's been the first player in our Players' Championship. And Brian Bronduin, who we saw on camera last round, he locked up one of the first Players' Championship slots all the way back in March at Charlotte.
Yeah, Derek Sheets win in the Invitational during the Legacy portion with Esper Deathblade, Brian Bronduin. The front leader, once William Huey Jensen sort of received a little bit from playing in the Open Series and was able to snag that Season 1 point invite.
Yeah, the second season went on and we saw Tom Ross get his first of his 2 Invitational wins. Chris Van Meter ran away for the most part with the points lead as he carried that one all the way up to the Invitational. Tom Ross winning that one with Boss Sly at the Invitational.
A signature win in the standard portion with Boss Sly, an absolutely brutal, efficient, lean, mono red 18-17 land deck. Chris Van Meter, a dominant performer over the Open Series throughout the first 2 months of 2014 and the back end of 2013.
The third Invitational, Tom Ross wasn't done with his dominance. He won, while he'd won the previous one in Standard, he won this one in Legacy. Joe Lissette held off Alex Bertoncini to be the points winner, but Tom Ross can't be in the tournament twice, so that invitation passes from Tom Ross down to the runner-up, which is Reed Duke. His blue-white-red Miracles deck, which made it into the finals, earns him spot number 6 in the Players' Championship.
I'm sure Reed would have liked to win that match, but qualifying for the Players' Championship, a nice consolation prize, had a really rough matchup with Infect in the finals and couldn't quite get it done.
All right, back into our match. We're underway here. Kenny on the play with a turn 1 Grim Lavamancer. Alex responded with a Deathrite Shaman, but Kenny had the Searing Blaze for the Shaman. Alex does have a turn 2 Jite, one of the better cards in this matchup, but he's on a 5-card hand and not even sure he has a creature to put it on.
It's one of the best cards in the matchup when you have a creature. Until then, it's just yet another mulligan.
Deep. All right, land 3 from Kenny. He has a Grim Lavamancer. Looks like he's going to add a second one. Grim Lavamancer swings in. Alex is down to 15, taking damage rather slowly, but Alex needs to find a game plan of his own if he wants to stop these attacks.
Playing the second Lavamancer here, a slight risk if Alex has a Maelstrom Pulse, which there's typically one in the main deck of Jund lists.
Yep, Alex is playing the 1. It's possible he'd side that out in this matchup, however.
I think it's not great. It's one of the on the lower end of cards, but it's not impossible he would leave it in.
Yeah, certainly against a deck like Burn, there's no shortage of cards that you don't really want to see in the matchup.
Right.
Turn 3, Alex is going to cast the 1 of Maelstrom Pulse, as you mentioned, and I want to make a note here. Kenny didn't have to bin both of those. He had an oh, no, wait, the one at Summoning Sickness? Okay.
But with a fetch land up, he could have simply passed the turn, which is possibly correct anyway,
right,
given his mana constraints and all that kind of stuff. And
if he didn't swing, he could have left that 1 up, and then if a Maelstrom Pulse happened, he could have cracked the fetch land and had the Grim Lavamancer shoot itself.
Correct.
As it is, Alex gets both Grim Lavamancers, and Kenny is left with nothing but a Lava Spike to the face, putting Alex to 11. And here is Liliana. Kenny, we'll see what he does here. He played out land number 4, may regret doing that. So instead, what he's going to do is in response to the Liliana activation, he's going to dump his whole hand. That's Bolt and Fire Blast. 7 damage. Alex is down to 4.
Yeah, if Kenny's hand is castable, I'm all about just going ahead and playing out that last land, because he needs it to be able to cast another Fire Blast off the top. I think he absolutely need to play that land there. There's no reason not to. And now if he has Sulfuric Vortex, or I don't know, you can always use the mana. It's better than not having it.
Sylvan Library is the draw for Finchler. He's going to try to find a creature to stick that Jite onto, but he's going to have to do it quickly. Kenny drew Chain Lightning and puts Alex down to 1.
And now there's actually a big consequence here because of the Jite. If Alex finds a creature, now Kenny not playing that land is really significant because he can't cast a Rift Bolt if he draws it, and he might just get hit by a Jite and lose the game.
Liliana's going to plus it. Alex discards Punishing Fire, which means his top 3, the other 2 I can't imagine are creatures.
No, that's not what he wanted to draw there. So discard, more land, something along those lines.
Kenny on end step is going to fetch up a mountain, try to increase his chances of drawing into a burn spell. He gets Goblin Guide. Looks like it might be lethal, but Alex does have the Grove of the Burn Willow's Punishing Fire that he set up, is able to knock down the Goblin Guide. Didn't even bother revealing, knew it wasn't to land on top. So Finchler still alive at 1.
Not the place you want to be against Burn, but still playing. Just got to find a creature, that's the thing.
Absolutely.
Although Liliana going ultimate is not the worst here because it does cut off another sequence of Kenny's draws, which is another issue with not playing that land, because he would be able to keep 2 lands into play after a Liliana split. And now it means cards like Price of Progress, other 2-mana burn spells, they're not functional.
So do you actually like Kenny just getting rid of the Liliana to Stone Rain, or Alex getting rid of the Liliana to Stone Rain Kenny?
If he's got nothing better going on, it still cuts off a set of draws. Fire Blast and Price of Progress don't work. And I don't know what else is going on with this Liliana.
And that's what he's going to do. One of the world's most expensive Stone Rains. He draws a card there. And it's Bloodstained Mire for Kenny. Alex gets to continue fighting. And now he goes to work on Kenny's life total. No.
Who's the burn deck? I can do this too.
He gets back the Punishing Fire, but elects not to cast it. And we'll see, has he found a creature? It looks like he's found Deathrite Shaman.
All right.
Suits it up with Umezawa's Jite, says go.
Now that's a spot I feel like Kenny needed to sacrifice that fetch land on his upkeep, because right now it's, you draw a burn spell where you lose, most likely. And if you sacrifice the fetch land in the upkeep, you do thin out your deck, and it still leaves Searing Blaze as a live draw because you fulfilled the landfall requirement.
Yeah, but now Alex is going to get to connect with an Umezawa's Jite. It looks like Kenny missed on a burn spell again. And with 2 Jite counters, Kenny's going to have a hard time burning Alex out anymore.
He can't beat gaining 4 a turn. The only way that he can really proceed from here is finding a 3rd land and a Sulfuric Vortex if they're still in the deck. That shuts off the Jite, and then he can go from there. Or there's the off chance that he sided in his copies of Smash the Smithereens, which is unlikely but possible.
Yeah, it is a 1 of Umezawa's Jite out of the Jund deck. It's the only artifact they play. So
it's really unlikely, but it's not impossible, I suppose.
Agreed. We'll see what Alex wants to do here. He has another Liliana. And he's going to go ahead and plus it. He discards a Punishing Fire. Kenny discards a Bloodstained Mire. And what almost seemed like a foregone conclusion for the burn deck is now turning toward the Jund player.
Yeah. Had his draw steps to find something, but missed, and then once this starts happening, you're not coming back.
Yeah, and in that case, the sequencing almost doesn't matter of how Kenny sequenced it because he simply didn't draw enough burn spells to do anything here. There is one thing he could have done, and I'm going to go ahead and back up here. I do believe there was an opportunity. So with the one turn he swung with Grim Lavamancer, he could have shot Alex with Grim Lavamancer.
Which I think is the play he should have been doing anyway.
Shooting and then not playing the second one.
No, I think if you leave the first Lavamancer up, you can play the second one.
Sure. And then so then
you
he gets to keep a Lavamancer.
You get insurance against Maelstrom Pulse or Bile Blight. Maybe he has randomly, whatever the case may be. And it didn't look like he had anything to do with the mana or the graveyard. So that's a pretty good shot to get in a shot with your Grim Lavamancer. And he came up 1 point short.
And that's something I think you'd have to have a lot of experience to know, is that a lot of times when you play a Grim Lavamancer, if you see a free 1 point of damage, you take it because you can have the 2 points later. But Legacy, you're saying, is a fast enough format that you take the 2 points as soon as you can get it.
There's a lot of variables that go into, how I go about making that decision at various points. But in the spot that Kenny was in, against a deck like Punishing Jund, you only get so many opportunities again with your creatures. They're going to die so fast that with Lavamancer, you can't assume it's going to be in play for 5 turns. In those kind of matchups, you can attack and then, ping when it's convenient. But against them, you just have to get your shots in.
Kenny trying to make a show of it here. He cast Searing Blood on the Deathrite Shaman. Is going to knock Alex down to 6. But since then, Alex has found a Tarmogoyf to suit that Umezawa's GT onto. And I just don't see Kenny ever getting back into this.
No, it's... Again, he can still, I suppose, draw Sulfuric Vortex, but even then, Alex has the ability to split Sulfuric Vortex against lands with those Liliana, and that'll do it too.
He can make that split. Sulfuric Vortex also doesn't really race the Tarmogoyf that Alex has anymore.
Yeah, all that allows Kenny to do is potentially draw live, and Alex has that covered with Liliana the Veil anyway.
So as you hear Alex fetching some lands, is going to go about closing this one out. But it really comes down to the turns where Kenny gets Alex down to 1, and what can he draw at that point? Could he find a burn spell before Alex was able to Sylvan Library into a creature? The answer was no. And as it stands, it should be a 3-turn clock for Finchler. Maybe even 2. It looks like he has Bloodbraid Elf. That'll certainly make it a 2-turn clock.
Yeah.
Kenny at 19. Alex thought he's not going to cast that one on an empty hand. And 8 damage swinging in will put Kenny down to 11. We'll see what Alex does with the counters. Maybe he gained life. Maybe he pumped for 4. Either way, it doesn't seem to matter. He gained 4 life, went up to 13.
Every mode is fine.
And that means...
You can see Alex kind of twiddling his thumbs a little bit, like, well, what did you draw, a spike or a bolt?
It's
kind of doesn't matter.
When your opponent gains 4 life a turn, there are very few top decks that are worthwhile in the burn deck. See, Rift Bolt on the Bloodbraid Elf will buy Kenny a turn. That's about it. Alex did have lethal there with a swing, a pump from Jite, and getting back Punishing Fire off Grove. Now that Bloodbraid's gone, he'll likely need a second turn to do it.
Yeah.
But a very close game by Alex. He did stabilize at 1. It looks like he's gonna win a difficult matchup to move to 5-1.
Yep. I mean, Kenny had his shots there. Maybe he could have played a little bit more efficiently with some of his resources earlier on in the game. Definitely had some draw steps to find the win and just missed too many of them.